Hello. So we talked about the use effect hook in the previous video, and now we are going to talk about the async functions in JavaScript. What are async functions? But before getting to the async functions, you need to know what are promises, because async functions return promises, and before going to async functions, you need to know what are promises in JavaScript. So if you don't know promises, you will not understand async functions. So that's why I'm gonna go to promises first. Now, what is a promise, or what are promises in JavaScript? So let's understand with the help of an article on the official website of JavaScript, which is the javascript.info. This is a really important website if you want to learn JavaScript or React, because this has the documentation of everything almost on JavaScript in a very simple and basic language, and from like a beginner to advanced, all of it is covered here in this website. Okay, so what are promises? So here's a little story here. So I'll not bore you with while reading all of the stories. I'll just give you the brief introduction about promises. So promises are like in this there's a written a story, so I'll tell that story in brief. Here it is written that imagine you are a singer and your fans are just always messaging you, always whenever you go out there troubling you, and they're asking you when your next song will come out. Okay, and you as a singer are tired of listening to that, and you are just fed up, like of the audience always asking about the new song, about the new album and all. So what you do here is that you get so frustrated. So now what you do is that you give a link to you give a link to your fan containing a form in which they need to put their email IDs. Okay, you need to give the link of an online form. Okay, so as soon as your audience receive this form, so there they will have an option to fill a form, and in that they need to fill their email IDs. So once they fill their email IDs, you will give a message to them that okay, I fill your email IDs here, and as soon as my song or album will come up, you will get an email notification that the song or email is up now. As simple as that. So now what the singer or what you are doing is that you are making a promise to your audience. Okay, you are making a promise to that to your audience that okay, I will be giving you a notification once my song or album comes out. Okay, so this is the promise. So this is how promise will be working in JavaScript. Now the promise, there are two cases for the promise. The promise can be resolved, that means it can be fulfilled, or it cannot be fulfilled, it cannot be resolved. So that is what it can be rejected also. For example, if you upload the song and your album, then you'll notify your users, your audience, that okay, I have uploaded the song. So in this case, the promise is resolved and it's returning resolved. But what if you don't, you are not able to deliver the song, your studio gets burned, all of this is written here. Okay, your studio gets burned and you are not able to deliver the song. So in that case, it's a reject because it's not resolved. Okay, so that is what it's written here. So this is a real life analogy of things we often have in programming. So there's a programming code, so that does something and take time. For instance, some code that loads the data over a network, that's a singer. So this takes time. Okay, the producing code takes time. Producing code is the singer, so singer will take some time to produce the song. Okay, so next we have a consuming code. Now consuming code will be taking producing code as an input. Okay, keep this in mind, this is very important. So consuming code wants the result of the producing code once it's ready. So once the song is ready, the consuming code or the consumer will need the producing with output from the producing code. Okay, so these are the fans. And next we talk about promises, like what is the promise. So promise is just whatever the output of this code. Okay, promise is a special JavaScript function that links to the producing code, I told you already, and the consuming code together. In terms of analogy, this is subscription list. This is a subscription list, like we got the list of the users, right, or of which we took the email IDs. The producing code takes whatever time it needs to produce the promise result, and the promise makes that result available to all subscribed code when it is ready. So it will return the promise. All right, now let's take a look at the basic syntax of this promise. So promise is a variable. It will be initialized like this: new promise, and it will expect a function. Inside the function it will expect two arguments. These are predefined. So these arguments would be resolve and reject. So resolve is when the code is resolved and the promise is resolved. So resolve will be returned in that case, and reject will be returned if that promise is not fulfilled and the promise is not successful. So reject will be returning an error. Okay, now this is the executor or the producing code. So here all the execution of the code will be done, the function will be called here, and all the execution will be done here. And after all, they will see that if it's returning the desired value, then it's resolved, else it's rejected. Okay, so this all, I'll not bore you with all that. Let me just tell you about this diagram right here. So let me explain you. So new promise, this is a new promise we have made, or the executor has made a new promise. So before beginning the execution, the state of the promise is pending. All right, and the result is undefined. Obviously before execution, how can we tell that what is the result and what is the state? State we can tell that it's pending, but we can't predict the result. Okay, so the result is undefined before the execution. All right, and once it's executed and it returns the resolve, like it the promise resolves, so that's a green signal. So once the promise is resolved, the state would change to fulfilled. Once the promise is resolved, the state would change to fulfill, and the result will be the value which is returned by the promise, by the function. All right, now let's take a look at the next phase of it. If the promise gets rejected and the promise is not resolved or the promise is not fulfilled, that means we receive an error. Okay, so in that case the state would be rejected. It would be rejected and the result would be an error, because we can't get a value if the promise is rejected. We will just get an error and the state would be rejected. So that's all about the promises. That there are a lot of things, for example here the state is pending, the result is undefined, but when it's resolved, the state is fulfilled and the result is done. Same as that, same as this. So this is what this page will tell all about, but there are a lot of more things also to the advanced. You can take a look and read this page. This is really informative, so you can learn about this at the bottom. So that's all about the promises. Now once we know the promises, we will be learning about async and await. Now what are async and await? So we'll go here. Okay, so now let me tell you about the async and await, and for that we need to go to the promises, and then we'll go to async and await. Okay, so this is the documentation for the async and await. So let me just tell you what is it. So there's a special syntax to work with promises in more comfortable fashion called async and await. You see, promise, work with promises. So this is based on promises only, but in a better way. So it's surprisingly easy. Just take a look at this line. It's surprisingly easy. That means this is the easy form of the promises to understand and use. Okay, so next we have async function. This is the basic syntax of the async function. So let's start with the async keyword. It is placed before any function like this. So this is the normal function which we write in JavaScript, but it will have this keyword before this name of the function, or before the word, this function word, there will be a keyword which is async. So that will make this function async. Now what does the async function do? Async function returns a promise. Async function will return a promise, and we already talked about promises. All right, so here we have a function which will return 1, and then we are alerting. Like alerting means like taking what is the return value. We are alerting what is this function. Okay, f dot then alert. So this means alert this alert the return value of this function, so we'll get the answer 1, right? And this is the promise resolved, so that is 1. Now this is the promise which is resolved, so this is same as this, because we the promise return, like the resolved promise returns the result is 1. Okay, but next we will take a look at await. Now what is await? Because await and async both are used together, they are not like used separately, they can't. Async await will be used inside the async only, works only with async functions as it's already written here. So let value is equal to await promise. So now what will this do is that, for example, this is an async function, and this all code is written here inside this function. So let a promise, that they are defining a promise, so resolve this and that. Now let result is equal to await promise. Now what is this await do? So this means this execution will go on here, and this is executing. Then after that we'll come to this. Now await will tell JavaScript to wait for the execution of this entire thing, like whatever the function name we put here. So it will, this keyword will tell JavaScript to, hey, wait, this function is executing, so till then you can do another thing, another work, but don't move further, because this function has been executed. All right, so after the function is executed, like after we get the promise as resolved, so then the JavaScript moves forward. Here you can see the keyword await makes JavaScript wait until that promise settles and returns its result. So it's written clearly here. So this is the basic thing, and you can't use await in regular function, you need to use await in async function only. Okay, so await won't work on the top level code, it needs to be inside the async, it will not work in the top level code. Okay, so there are a lot of things here, and inside the async and await function there are try and catch. Now what is try and catch? So let's see, we can catch the error using try and catch the same way we use regular throw. So try will run this code, and if this code like returns a proper resolved value, so then we'll get it. Otherwise, if we get an error, so it will catch the error and we'll pass that error inside this catch function, and then we can alert the error, or we can console log the error. So this was all about the async and async functions, await and try and catch and promises. So